Hello, this is Adam Carroll from Justice for All, and the show is UN This Week. The United Nations is not only a political and social effort, but a spiritual aspiration with the promise of unity, peace, and security, somewhat like the fabled Simurgh that the birds seek in the classic Sufi tale, The Conference of the Birds by Farid Attar. There is an inner aspect. And this dimension was embodied not only by one of the main shapers of the UN, the Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld, but also by many individuals and groups at work in the House today, even online. Online with me today, I have Steve Nation, director of the New York office of the Lucis Trust and a representative to the UN for World Goodwill, an activity of Lucis Trust. He is a former co-convener of the Spiritual Caucus at the United Nations. Steve is a co-founder of the Intuition in Service and the United Nations Days and Years Meditation Initiative. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Thanks, Adam. It's a pleasure to be here.
I was wondering if you could just speak a bit first about, what Lucis Trust is and how long you've been associated, especially at the UN.
Yeah, Lucis Trust. How long we've been associated at the UN? I think I was part of the team. Well, no, it began in the 1950s. We were one of the first organizations. World Goodwill was amongst the first organizations to be affiliated as an NGO with the UN, which is the way in which civil society groups establish a relationship with the UN. So we've been supporting the UN for a long time. So who on earth are we? Who is this Lucis Trust laddie? I've sometimes seen it called Lucy. Lucis is it's the Latin word derivative of light. It's a charity, a non-profit associated with light, which means that primarily we're an educational body. We do international work. We have offices in New York, London, and Geneva, and we work in about, I think, 6 languages. Lucis Trust, we came from a tradition in spiritual philosophy known as theosophy. During the early years, the last decades of the 19th century and the early years of the 20th century, the early decades of the 20th century, there was a terrific flowering of spiritual traditions, and particularly for Westerners, almost a synthesis, but the beginning of a large dialogue between Eastern systems and Western systems of philosophy, of metaphysics. And out of that grew a huge movement drawn by the vision of the oneness and unity of all life. And the Alice Bailey, who was the founder of the Lucis Trust, is within that tradition. And it's a spiritual teaching, it's an occult, esoteric teaching of the whole energy structure of the planetary life and of an individual human being, and the interpenetrating levels of life and consciousness that is the sort of incredible richness of what life is and what the planet is and so on. And so Lucis Trust, we have educational activities that, first of all, there's a training school in philosophy, which is really a school about integration, about helping the individual through exercise of the mind, through meditation, study, and through a life of service, which the individual is left free to develop. But the essential magic of any spiritual work, really, I think, comes from this integration of work to train the mind. Any philosophy that has a sense of oneness and unity, such as is very strongly a sense within the Islamic tradition, a focus on a philosophy to provide a way in which the mind can begin to grasp the nature of reality and the nature of who life is, who I am, that incorporates the sacred, the divine, and the profane, the human, the worlds of timelessness and the world of time. And that, if you like, spirituality is about the conscious work we as human beings do to build a relationship and an integration between the vertical arm, the sort of divine and timeless and time, and the horizontal arm of relationship with others, with all kingdoms of nature, with the subtle realms of nature, with all elements of life. So there's 24 books of esoteric philosophy by Alice Bailey that are the basis of our work. Then what we really want to be, what I think would be a really great conversation, Adam, that we can have when we're looking at the UN, is the work that's growing out of this. There are two major service activities. One is Triangles, which is a meditation activity where ideally three people from different spiritual traditions, make a commitment that they will link in thought each day and use an invocation to invoke universal energies of light and love and will, spiritual will, purpose, to pour into the field of human consciousness, to strengthen everything being done to build a world of justice, a world of increasing unification and unity, and a world of cooperation and what we would call right relationships. Mm-hmm. Then what we really want to talk about today is world goodwill, and because world goodwill, as we said earlier, has had this relationship with the UN since civil society could begin. Like many spiritual non-profit, spiritual civil society organizations, the world goodwill feels very closely allied with the purposes and principles that are enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. Why? Because these purposes and principles are a way to seek to enable all the different nations, all the different peoples, the different faiths, the different cultures, to begin to cooperate and work as if we are what we truly are, which is one human family, humankind. And world goodwill seeks to serve those purposes which are enshrined in the UN goals through education, through a variety of meditation approaches to meditation, which are offered to everybody, whether they've ever heard of Alice Bailey or not. Our goal is not to promote Alice Bailey. Our goal is simply to promote the use of the mind to serve in the building of right relationships.
It can be overwhelming to face the conflict in the world, but also the conflict in oneself. I mean, the displacement in the world, but the displacement in oneself. And so certainly there are roots, there is a connection between the individual and the whole. And that relationship is quite profound. And as we struggle to try to make the world a better place, we face challenges and we face failure. And it's a struggle with humility. And so I think that may, even in our politicians, even in our political leaders, that may encourage a going more deeply inside and seeking not just mere success, but to some sort of transformation of the game or of the rules.
Totally. Look, Adam, to my way of thinking, if there is something divine within the human being, like if you take the mind, that there are these aspects of mind that all human traditions have affirmed, where as we build a relationship with this higher, I call it the soul, in our tradition we call it the soul, but you can call it what you will, this divine aspect of man or of the human, as we build a relationship with this, we begin to see through the eyes of a higher perspective, as if we're up on a mountaintop. And from that perspective, we are one with all life. And therefore, the whole purpose and the whole work of being a human being is to seek to serve in the bringing of that sense of oneness into expression in the world, in every area of the world, including our own lives.
It can be, again, daunting since the world appears so broken, and natural world is so besieged and in danger. And yet, I think when the UN was first chartered and organized, that the fear of nuclear war was very present. And I think that urgency was in the air. Now, I don't know, but there are many reactions one can have to the many conflicts, the many-sided conflicts of the world now. So education, enlightening practitioners, enlightening members of the UN community seems like a very patient and necessary work. Is that how you see your role at Lucis?
Yes, certainly patient, in the sense of we have to look at timescales that are both include a human timescale, which means what can be achieved in 10 years and 15 years, which is why the SDGs are such a fabulous thing, because they really work with time, and they're trying to learn to work intelligently with time. But we have to balance that between the sense, because the changes, the only way to truly build, say, a respect for human rights, or the issue you're involved with in the rights of Muslim, particularly Muslim minorities, and any minority community, that comes, there are laws, there are politics, but it really requires a consciousness that sees the divinity of every individual human being, that sees that the human being, the individual, is an embodiment of the sacred, and at some stage on a path towards wholeness and integration. And then everything about our relationship with the individual, but with the whole, changes. But I think that the present time, to me, the UN was born out of crisis, and there's a great spiritual value of crises. And so this pandemic crisis, but also the various conflicts and even the intense polarization within this country, because this program is sort of based on slightly US based, has a slight US focus. So the polarization within this country and in many other countries, but is also provoking people to take some responsibility for, in themselves, finding a new place for cooperation that is not neutral. In other words, that is on the side of brotherhood, but is on the side of human unity and justice and peace, and yet values every individual and sees everything as a path leading towards wholeness. So crises are valuable, and you know, in the life of each one of us, we don't say it when we're immersed in the crisis, but afterwards, if it's a real spiritual crisis, we will say, God bless that experience, because through that, something was really burnt out, you know, a little like a flame torch was put, and something happened. And so we mightn't like it, but it's one of the ways in which I believe the divine works to push evolution forward, by giving us, presenting crises and see, how will the little darlings cope with this? You know,
Yeah.
and we are in time now of extreme crisis. climate change, obviously, and so this awakening of the conscience and the awakening for any spiritual tradition, any religion, the awakening of those spiritual resources to be turned upon positive work to resolve that crisis. I think that's what's, I really think that's what's happening. So to me, this is a wonderful time, and the Sustainable Development Goals at the UN are probably the best archetypal expression of human achievement, of where we've come.
It is true. Perhaps I say that with some dismay, but that crisis is an opportunity, and that we pay attention, and perhaps we suffer, and some suffering can be useful, but certainly it's not to be imposed on others. So how we embrace that challenge is, quite a question for each individual, as well as perhaps each nation. At the UN, when I think the second Secretary General, Dag Hammarskjöld, was in office, late 50s, early 60s, before his untimely death in the plane crash, the mysterious plane crash. He was, I think, generally liked, attacked by de Gaulle, attacked by Russia, but really tireless. And after his passing, he left behind a manuscript called Markings, which was published to great acclaim and interest, a kind of memoir or diary. And though I've had to order my copy from Amazon because I had a copy and I can't find it. But anyway, it's really profound. It's like Marcus Aurelius or Montaigne. It's really, or Pascal. It's really very deep. And it was kind of a shock to say, oh, Dag Hammarskjöld, I've seen his name everywhere. I thought he was just some kind of guy who was famous. And then suddenly you taste his inner deliberation and his seeking. And so it kind of gives a new dimension just to being in the UN building when we're there.
Exactly. It's the remarkable thing to me is someone who's, imagine the intensity of the life of anybody who's at the forefront of international affairs and, constantly with having to face the media, constantly having to mediate between even battles within your own institution, fights between egos. And in all of that intensity of that life, he had this rich inner life of incredible honesty in his relationship with what I would call the soul, with the mystery at the heart of what it is to be a human. And he kept taking these notes, which are like prayers. And because of this inner focus, it was also related to his attitude to the organization, because it's clear from Markings and also from his talks and writings that were public that he could see that the United Nations represented an evolutionary possibility for consciousness. And one of the sort of amazing gifts he made to the UN, which was at that stage a very young organization, was he laid out the principles for an international civil servant and the sort of ethics of what it would mean for a civil servant to devote their life to the purposes and principles of the UN, which meant to devote their life to human development, to the increasing ability of humanity to organize and discipline its relationships in order to manage conflict. One of the things, of the great things about that's in the UN Charter is that it has this goal to harmonize the actions of nations for the common good, for the purposes of the UN. And that principle, which is so different from people who criticize the UN as wanting to unify everything and make everything into one sort of single government or something, which has nothing to do with the UN. In fact, the UN is about developing processes and wisdom in the human community as to how we can harmonize the actions of all these different nations. And Hammarskjöld is really at the heart of that vision. And he's provided all of the groundwork, all of the essential teachings for someone whose professional life as an international civil servant serving the UN and the UN's purposes is able to be perceived and practiced as a spiritual discipline.
I wanted to add, just not to cut you off, I didn't mean to do that, but just to say that Dag Hammarskjöld did say in one of his writings that the opposite of dialogue is not silence, but it's lying. So there's an interesting idea there that, to engage in dialogue, we have to be open and have an attitude of interest in the other. And that may need work to be achieved. And in this country, in the United States now, we're so polarized, and many other countries too. And there's so much lying and fake news and distortion of every kind. It's so dialogue could, and I think dialogue is also related to negotiation on a more formal level. These formal modes of discussion, I think the UN is the forum for that, or at least the global forum for that process. And it may not always come to success quickly, but it's the process. So I think that anyway, I was wondering if you had any further thoughts about dialogue and conversations at the UN. And again, I promise not to interrupt you as part of the dialogue.
I often need someone to say, look here, Stevie, cut it short, stop. So I'm very grateful to you for doing that. I think that the thing about the UN is, all it is really is a series of the physical buildings are just conference rooms. It is a place of dialogue. The UN headquarters, what it is meeting rooms and places to bring together all these diverse viewpoints. But the thing about dialogue, and the thing that is where the lifeblood of the UN and also of our local town, any system of governance, is to foster and empower goodwill. So dialogue is, it's exactly as you said about dialogue, that the opposite of dialogue is, well, it's like hatred. I mean, but dialogue can only proceed where there is goodwill. In other words, where even though people have different viewpoints, there is a will to achieve something out of our coming together, and the will to achieve something that is better than what we have now. And so goodwill is really the essential quality, and the UN is developing skills, I think, and it takes a long time for these skills to develop because they're really spiritual skills, in how do you craft a discussion, craft a negotiation between all different countries of the world, say different nations, that have completely different systems of governance. Some are monarchies, some are authoritarian fascist type regimes, some are attempting to be democracies. There's a huge range of forms of governance, and the UN has to craft an environment that will try to evoke a common sense of what's possible to be achieved, and a spirit of goodwill.
So hence the name of your program, of course.
Yeah. I mean, the essence of our work is that right human relations grow out of the energy of goodwill. That goodwill is an energy, and it's the most fundamental resource in any community at any level. And real politics is about real politicians are those who can create an environment that draws forth the goodwill that's a natural goodwill of people.
Well, it may not be as exciting as competition and backstabbing, but in the long run, it feels better. I kind of feel, and so we do see both at the UN, and we do see the ongoing conversation, and it does wonderful things every day for so many. So it's unfortunate that its reputation is sort of tarnished. But again, when people say the UN this and the UN that, the UN is so many things. And I'm glad you brought up the SDGs. That is an important structure and important framework for real efforts to make the world a better place. So I think we're going to do a station break just for a moment. We'll be right back. This is Adam Carroll with Justice for All.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. Past campaigns covered a wide range of humanitarian concerns. Through Bosnia Task Force, imams and leaders of Chicago's Muslim community worked to ensure Bosnia became a top national issue. This led to life-saving American policies in Bosnia. A key accomplishment was helping to get rape declared a war crime. Initiatives also included Kosovo Task Force, Central African Republic Task Force, and Flint Coalition, which brought awareness to the water crisis affecting the people of Flint, Michigan. Highlights of our work include supporting Black Lives Matter, Parliament of the World's Religions, addressing climate change.
So wasteful consumption starts the ruthless production, and that's where we need all the fossil fuel in the world.
And prominent media exposure.
This is Imam Malik Mujahid, President of Justice for All.
And I'm the Director of Outreach for Justice for All.
And that's why we need to go back to what worked.
Today we're demanding an apology from the CEO of Costco.
The Chinese crackdown on Uyghurs and other Turkic people has only gotten worse.
Current programs such as Burma Task Force advocate for the rights of Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, internally displaced populations, and all those denied freedom of movement and at risk of starvation. Through this, we mobilized thousands of calls to elected representatives. This paved the way for the U.S. to increase funding for Rohingya refugees from $30 million to over $600 million. 2 of our documentaries were featured on international news outlets. The Rohingya People, A Slow-Burning Genocide on BBC World News, and Rohingya Refugees Tell of Massacre was featured on CNN. We've organized rallies, UN mission visits, expanded presentations on campuses, promoted research and report writing, outreach to think tanks, media, and other influencers. Faith Coalition educates about the Rohingya genocide and crimes against humanity faced by ethnic groups in Burma. We've traveled to refugee camps, convened a meeting of Karen, Kachin, and Rohingya leaders, both to encourage cooperation and to guide them in congressional outreach. We organized Rohingya Advocacy Day. This led to over 100 participants visiting the offices of 60 U.S. senators and congressional representatives. Free Kashmir advocates for the people of Kashmir. Long-term goals include the call for self-determination, the end of the Indian military's occupation of the territory, and raising awareness of Kashmiri issues among the American people. After the August 5th reinvasion of Kashmir, we organized national protests in front of various Indian government buildings, partnered with Stand With Kashmir, and launched a petition condemning the Gates Foundation's decision to present Prime Minister Modi a humanitarian award. Save Uyghur informs Muslims and neighbors of other faiths about the ongoing cultural genocide of Uyghur Muslims and mobilizes public support. Our projects include boycotting Chinese products with our Fast from China campaign, pushing Bill S-178 in the Senate, and organizing a nationwide protest of Costco. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. Justice for all.
Okay, we're back. This is Adam Carroll with Justice for All, here with Steve Nation with the Goodwill Program of the Luchas Trust. Not goodwill hunting, that's another thing entirely, but we are hunting for goodwill. So as far as the community and perhaps the more spiritual aspect of the UN, even now, I wanted to bring up one institution within the UN, which is the meditation room, which was formed first, I believe, by a long process. There was a Reverend, what was his name? Not Hunsaker. Maybe you know better.
I don't know.
Yeah,
There was a Christian group that originally.
Yes. Huckabee, Reverend Huckabee, and he brought this idea first to the UN when it was in its other locations, and then over time they got the attention, including of Doug Hammarskjöld, and this 6-ton cast iron, is it?
Yes, it's iron ore. It's iron ore, and it's said to, like, it symbolizes the solid rock of matter, and there's a light shining down onto that huge block of iron ore, and so you have spirit shining onto matter. And in Hammarskjöld's idea, one of the things about the meditation room, there's an incredible article by a journalist at the time who was with Hammarskjöld, and she was sort of trailing him to do a piece, I guess, on a day in the life of the Secretary General. And she said it was late at night, and he suddenly called all the heads of department. And so she thought that there's some huge crisis going on. And he said, we have to go down to the meditation room. And when they were in the meditation room, he had a terrific sense of the arts, and he was almost fanatical about everything about that room had to be done correctly. It's almost like Islamic architecture, that every element on it was really of significance and was to be done with perfection. Presumably, and there's a little bit of imperfection in the rock. And he said that if we don't get this room right, nothing of this organization will work. And in a way, to me, that's the relationship between the inner work and the outer work. And the inner work is silent. But the other thing is, you're talking about the spirituality and the spirit of the sort of community of people who work at any of the UN headquarters, the headquarters in New York or Geneva or the UNIP headquarters in Kenya. Any of these places, is that many of the individuals from UN missions, from the International Civil Service, and from civil society, their heart is oriented towards using their time to move towards greater cooperation, greater harmony, and to be able to make progress. And that is the central resource of the UN, and that's the spirituality of the UN. Inner work.
That's certainly not fear-based, or at least
exactly not. And also, but the beauty of it is that it comes from every tradition. It's irrelevant what tradition someone comes from or what their political philosophy is even. It's those who are there and able to put this higher will and submit to that higher will in the very limited sort of, we're human beings, so we don't do things so well. Hence, we have all of our problems. But it's the purpose to serve this higher sense of unity. And that's what you really see active at the UN, and progress comes out of that community of human beings and their organizations.
It's interesting that across the street from the UN, there's the church center.
Yes.
And that does include the symbols of many faith traditions. But the meditation room itself does not. It's elemental, and it's very clean, kind of pure. And so it's an interesting, different approach. I did remember that Reverend Huckabee also was able to get this idea moving, partly because he had an ally in Pakistan foreign minister, who is a head of delegation at the UN, named Muhammad Zafarullah Khan, who wanted a place to do his daily prayers. So again, it was always an interfaith endeavor. And now, again, it is a bit, I would say some of those rattan chairs or benches are a little threadbare. But there's also a wonderful, I think, inscription maybe from Dag Hammarskjöld, which includes the words, there is an ancient saying that the sense of a vessel is not in its shell, but in the void. So it is with this room. It is for those who come here to fill the void with what they find in their center of stillness. So everyone comes and brings their own search to the shared space. And I think that is partly what the UN is. With expanding that, there is a spiritual caucus, which you have been very active in, co-convener and so forth. I was wondering if you could speak to the spiritual caucus at the UN.
Yes, the Spiritual Caucus is a group of representatives of primarily NGOs, but in different times it has included people from UN missions who've participated in Spiritual Caucus meetings. It started in the year 2000, and it has worked consistently and regularly since then. The purposes of the UN are to work with silence, with concentrated periods of silence, in support of the purposes and principles enshrined in the UN Charter. So on the third Thursday of every month, from June to September, we're on a summer break and then we start again next month. There are a group of people who we used to meet within the UN and UN conference rooms. Now it's too difficult to get the demand for rooms is so high that that's not possible. So we meet in the vicinity of the New York headquarters. And we meet to hold 30 minutes of silence. And this picks up on the idea of the meditation room at the UN, that the way in which the different faiths find their unity is in the motive, in the inner silence of the mind and heart, where unity is able to be found. And the spiritual caucus seeks to use that, if you like, alignment with the higher energies, the divine potential of the UN, seeks to use that in, I would interpret, this is my interpretation, in an energetic way to invoke higher energies to help us as we seek to do this work. And that means all human beings who are seeking to build human unity, and to observe from a perspective of lighted unity, to observe the energies of goodwill that exist in the work of the UN. Because we know, like, one of the things of modern knowledge is that we know the act of seeing, the act of noticing and caring changes that which is seen. It's a basic thing of sort of quantum physics. And so in working together in complete silence and seeing that as a way of activist service to the UN principles, that's what the spiritual caucus does. It's a strange thing. And then we have this discussion that flows out of that silence, but the real work is the silence.
It sounds like a form of amplification of prayer, the way congregational prayer is said to be in some way a strengthening in the Islamic tradition, or I think in Christian tradition, it says whenever 2 or 3 are gathered together. Of course, individual prayer has value, but it sounds like a recognition that group prayer, even the triangle idea that you are organizing, has a kind of strengthening effect. So, that's if we're going to be healing the world and working towards unity, this sounds like a necessary tool, a necessary part of the work that we confront.
I also think, Adam, that it's part of where we're heading, that more and more people, the sort of materialism of life, particularly but in all parts of the world, in fact, the unbearable for so many people division between wealth and poverty, in other words, the absence of sharing, the absence of goodwill in our big structures of society, is pushing people to find the resources within themselves that enable them to withstand those the disconnect between what you sense within and what you see without. That requires terrific courage to be able to observe that and then to creatively respond in service to the movement and shifting towards balancing between pairs of opposites, balancing and fostering cooperation. There's never, to my mind, in human history, there's never been such a depth of will. And it's like prayer because it's a depth of will that says, not my will, but thine, which is a true, in my understanding of your tradition, that the submission to higher will as a free choice, that's the thing. Submission can't be, it only comes when it comes from the heart that sees the need, and then can become a creative worker and can become an active outer worker or not. It doesn't really matter, because everything depends upon the depth of one's reshaping of a life to make it a contribution towards the evolution and ultimately to the evolution of the planetary life. So in my belief, I believe that our planetary being is itself on a path towards the Earth becoming a sacred planet. And everything about the transition that humanity is facing is a fundamental part of this whole thing of the great life in whom we live and move and have our being, basically. So we're all little cells, and this work at the UN, there's such depth to it. And if we only see the headlines, wherever we are in the world, we'll just see headlines that reflect the point of view of the media, or of, it's just a popular point of view. If we only see that, we lose the magnificence of this experiment that human beings are engaged with. How do we truly build cooperation between powerful nations? How do we, even if you look at our national life, it's the same challenge. How do we call on the soul of the nation? I believe a nation is like an individual. There's a soul. And so the more of us who are drawn to contribute to an ecology, a spiritual ecology, an environment of interdependence that incorporates higher and lower, or vertical and horizontal. That's what the spiritual life is about, and then everything is a part of this.
I'm hearing a call for vision, and also simply for witness, for seeing what is, where we are individually and collectively, so that we can see more clearly, not just to analyze, not just to problem solve, but to experience fully the life that we've been given, and the choices we need to make to let the next generations also enjoy that gift.
Exactly.
And so it's a big thing. We're part of very large forces, and yet if anytime we reflect, we can see this same play of forces in ourselves at any moment.
Exactly. It also, there's an element of humility, and it can help us a lot, because if you look at an issue like disarmament, like the mind tells us it's such a straightforward thing. The amount of human resources, even the money that's invested in the arms race and in arms, it makes no sense. And yet, just look at ourselves. And all of us have some struggle with our own disarmament. It's good to see that, because we see it's not so simple and straightforward. It's much deeper. And when we see that, we also realize that that is what means we must draw on these higher parts, these where forgiveness comes from, where true things can be washed away. So the life of meditation and prayer, dedicated to the evolution of the UN, if you like, is really, I think it's a thing that's waking up in our time. It's from astrological perspective. Most ancient wisdom systems also draw on bases in astrology, sort of an understanding of that everything is alive, and that other planets are alive, and the Earth is in relationship with these other planets. And that gives us a way of thinking which sees influences coming in which are leading us more towards cooperation as Aquarius comes in, than all of the history of the past. And yet we can't forget the history, because that's who we are. That's in our genes and our DNA. And so the great work, which is it's the little tiny little laddie like me, it's my work, but it's also the divine's work. There's no difference. It's one work, that all of us, from whatever tradition we come from, and the UN is a perfect place to bring that into our inner life, to bring in this sense of the muscle of the human, and these muscular exchanges, sometimes violent, brought into relationship with the divinity of the human and with the human's newly acquired sense that of one life where human, animal, plant, the earth, the soil, the minerals are part of one life of the planet. That's like a new revelation. And in the face of that revelation, we human beings are being changed. And the UN is a really important place to measure how that change is going, to destroy our sort of idealistic sense of only we could have all peace and love and light. Fine. But okay, then in my little few years I've got allotted, let me find a way of contributing that, not for anybody else's sake, but just because that will completely transform the significance of my life. It will mean that my life is about it's about achieving disarmament. It's about ending inequity, poverty, and inequity. And there's a million ways of creatively I can do that. And no one's right or wrong, but it gives purpose. And I think that this truly is an awareness of the magnificence of what it is to be human. That's part of our time. I love this time. For many, it's a depressing time. It seems so awful. All of the violence, the crime, the abuse of sort of whole cultures, but also individual domestic abuse. These abuses, because they are so present before our eyes. And to me, that just means we've become strong enough as a species to be able to look at ourselves like that. And then we have to ensure that that is has a positive impact, and that we work to move forward towards our destiny is to love. We have the potential.
Well, on that note, let's leave it there. I think that because we actually are at time,
Right.
but it is inspiring, and there can be transformation, inner and outer, but it takes work. And so we can be helped by programs such as yours and other efforts at the UN and outside. We've got to work together. And so on that note, I'd like just to thank you very much, Steve, for coming on the show. And hopefully, as you said earlier, this will help. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Till
Thank you,
next
Adam.
time.
Thank you very much.